After almost a decade of war, Syrian economy is in shambles. Institutions and infrastructure, never good to begin with, were even further eroded by scorched earth methods propagated by both government and insurgency forces. But in late 2024, the war between the Assad government and the rebel forces, excluding the SDF, came to a swift end, with the lightning-fast victory of the rebel forces led by a former Al-Qaeda affiliated organization called the HTS. But now that the HTS rule majority of the country, they also inherited all the problems of the former Assad regime, as well as not being in control of all Syrian territory. To the south, Israel controls a buffer zone between Golden Heights and Syria. Up north, autonomous region called Rojava exists that's backed up by the US. And finally, Turkey also has its own puppet state that it used to place displaced Syrian immigrants, as well as to bomb Rojava. In today's video, I'm gonna cover economic situation as well as possible predictions for the future of Syria. So let's begin. Let's start with the shittest part of Syria, as well as the part needing of most reform. Its economy. From 2011 to 2023, Syrian GDP shrank by 85%, from 67 billion in 2011 to only 9 billion in 2023. And this is in spite of GDP being a shit way to measure economic well-being of state. Because GDP, standing for Gross Domestic Product, only measures exchange of goods and services in the economy. So let's say if government built 5,000 ships and drove them in the middle of the ocean, then sank. Despite nothing being accomplished, GDP would still mark that as an exchange of goods, aka money paid to the builders, and services, aka building the ships, thus line go up. Now, you could say, that's stupid, no government would build things just for them to get blown up, but they would. It's called the military. Missiles are built to be destroyed, and military spending is just a black hole for the finance that contributes to the GDP. So actual economic shrinkage from this time period was probably far worse. So it's no wonder that according to the World Bank's report from the mid-2024, before the HTS offensive, 70% of Syrians were living in poverty and another 27% were living in extreme poverty, up from the next to 0% in 2009, meaning only 3% of the population was living on normal income. Global average for extreme poverty is defined as living on less than $2 a day. Global average for the extreme poverty is 8.5%. In Syria, it's more than a quarter of the population. Extraction of natural resources is looking somehow even more abysmal, with oil, the only resource of any significant value, that's abundant in Syria, plummeting from 383,000 barrels a day to just 90,000 barrels a day in 2023, number that's almost certainly lower today due to the Assad regime's scorched earth policy after the start of the HTS offensive. Once the largest exporter in the eastern Mediterranean, Syria nowadays is an oil importer, with the majority of the oil coming from Iran, a consequence of close ties between Iran and former Assad regime, as well as mistrust of the Assad regime towards the other Arab countries, courtesy of his exclusion from the Arab League after the Arab Spring and the start of the civil war. From 2020 to 2023, imports nearly doubled, now accounting for almost half of the domestic oil consumption. The other sector equally as hard hit was agricultural sector, that only started slightly recovering in 2024. The collapse of this sector during the civil war was the most devastating one. It turns out that people can live without gas in their truck. They can't live without food in their belly, forcing Syria to start importing food from other countries and hoping for international food charities to arrive. Food insecurity was compounded further by high inflation rate. The government and individuals had to buy food in foreign currencies, depleting the foreign reserves in the country obtained from tourists before the war. To see just how bad inflation was, you just have to look at the official rates. Just in 2023, Syrian currency declined declined by 141%. Now, I don't want to go on a tangent about how government lies to you about inflation figures, but basically double the official figures and you will see a more probable number rather than the official one. Okay, that's enough. I think you can get how bad the economic and social situation is in Syria. So, how does the HTS plan on getting out of this hole? Well, through the mixture of NGOs, foreign investment, removal of sanctions, exploitation of natural resources, and normalization of relations with Western powers and Russia, as well as the PR plan to remove themselves from their Al-Qaeda heritage. So, is their plan actually working? Well, yeah, sort of. It seems that they are mostly being backed up and supported by Turkey and Kuwait. Turkish NGOs seem to have alleviated the food and water shortages. Turkish Trade Minister also met with business leaders, institutionalists and NGOs to discuss about foreign investment in Syria, as well as improvement of infrastructure and institutions. Although there might be some ulterior motives behind this, which we will talk about when we get to Rojava. Even the USA under Biden's administration removed most of the sanctions put on Syria to expedite the recovery. When it comes to PR and foreign relations, HTS is working hard to not look like a Muslim extremist group. They allowed the Russians to remain in their bases and want to keep good relations with them. They are also accepting any delegation from basically any country, with some incidents of course. For example, when Syrian de facto temporary dictator refused to shake hands with German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, most likely due to the interpretation of the Islamic law that forbids men from touching women that are not either their wives or closely related to them, which sparked some outrage in Germany that quickly faded away. Their bigger area of success in foreign relations was with Kuwait, because Kuwait promised to pay salaries of government workers in Syria for an undisclosed period of time. They have also managed to maintain neutral relations with their former enemy Iran. But the main enemy of the HTS is not a foreign one, it's domestic, and its name is Rojava. Rojava is an autonomous region in northeastern Syria that was established after the start of the civil war. It was created to safeguard Kurdish minority, although it has a sizable Arab population both in citizenry and in military. It grew to prominence during the War on Terror, where with the US support they fought hard and managed to push ISIS back. It's also the reason of disagreement between the USA and Turkey. The USA claiming Rojava as the only non-dictatorial faction in Syria and as the best shot Syria has at being a democratic country. Meanwhile, Turkey believes Rojava to be an offset of the PKK, which Turkey recognizes as a terrorist organization, making Turkey want Rojava gone completely from Syria and off their border. Turkey, throughout the entirety of the Syrian conflict, has been bombing and shelling Kurdish positions and infrastructure in Rojava. And now that Assad is gone and their close ally HTS is in charge of Syria, there are some calls to end Rojava once and for all. Standing in the way of this is the US, which moved some of its forces in Rojava to the areas close to the border with Turkey. Not so subtle suggestion that maybe they shouldn't invade, which although stopped Turkey, didn't deter the HTS from trying. And although they managed to capture some territory from SDF being the military wing of Rojava, they were stopped by the river, which created excellent choke points for the defensive SDF members. In return, Turkey has continued an almost daily aerial bombardment campaign of Rojava. HTS seemed to have opted out of attacking Rojava, at least for now, due to having bigger problems like economy and sporadic attacks of former Assad loyalists on HTS patrols. But if the economic policies don't work, it's very likely HTS will have another crack at conquering Rojava due to Rojavan oil fields. But for now everything seems to be calm, or at least as calm as a country exiting a decade of war can be. An uneasy truce exists between the SDF and HTS, while Turkey seems content to aerially bomb Rojava. What the future holds, I don't know, but if I had to guess, I'd say that HTS will withhold from further further attacks on STF, for foreseeable future at least. HTS will normalize relations with EU and the US, and economy in Syria will improve. Although I want to put out Trump as a wild card, because he could pull off the Americans from Rojava, and if he does that, that might send a signal to Erdogan and Turkey that they should be good to attack. Now, this is highly unlikely, but I just want to put it out as something that could happen.